The compass spun wildly in Victoria Emerson's hand as she stood in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by sagebrush and dusty red rocks that all looked exactly the same as the mile markers she had passed an hour ago. The Nevada sun beat down mercilessly on her shoulders, and she squinted at the hand-drawn map she had purchased in Winnemucca 3 days prior, only to realize with growing dread that the landmarks she had so carefully noted were either figments of the seller's imagination, or she had somehow managed to miss every single one of them. Her horse, a gentle mare named Daisy, stood patiently behind her, occasionally snorting at the dry desert air. It was July of 1874, and Victoria had traveled all the way from Boston with one purpose: to create accurate, reliable maps of the expanding Western territories. The irony of her current predicament was not lost on her. She turned in a slow circle, her practical brown traveling dress already coated with a fine layer of dust. The mountains in the distance provided no helpful information, as mountains tended to look the same from every angle when you did not know which mountains you were looking at in the first place. Her canteen was half empty, her provisions were running low, and the sun would set in a few hours. Victoria had been certain she could handle herself out here, had spent months studying existing maps and geographical surveys, had prepared herself mentally and physically for the challenges of the frontier. What she had not prepared for was her own ability to become completely and thoroughly lost. "Well, Daisy," she said to her horse, her voice sounding small in the vast emptiness, "I suppose we should try heading west. Or is that east? The sun is over there, which means—" She trailed off, realizing she had lost her sense of direction entirely. A low chuckle came from somewhere behind her, and Victoria spun around so fast she nearly dropped her useless compass. A man sat atop a large chestnut horse about 20 yards away, and she wondered how long he had been watching her talk to herself. He was tall in the saddle, broad-shouldered, with sun-darkened skin and dark hair that curled slightly at the edges beneath a worn brown hat. His eyes, even from this distance, seemed to dance with amusement. "Lost," he called out, his voice warm with barely suppressed laughter. Victoria straightened her spine, tucking an errant strand of auburn hair behind her ear. "Temporarily disoriented," she corrected, lifting her chin. "There is a difference." The man urged his horse forward, closing the distance between them with an easy grace that spoke of years in the saddle. As he drew closer, Victoria could see he was perhaps 26 or 27, with a strong jaw and a smile that suggested he found the world endlessly entertaining. He wore the practical clothing of a rancher, worn denim pants, a faded blue shirt, leather vest, and boots that had seen considerable use. "Temporarily disoriented," he repeated, the smile growing wider. "Is that what we are calling it now? Because from where I was sitting, it looked an awful lot like you were about to try reading that map upside down." Victoria glanced down at the map in her hands and felt heat rush to her cheeks. The map was, in fact, upside down. She quickly corrected it, though the damage to her dignity was already done. "I was merely examining it from a different perspective," she said stiffly. "Hum." The man dismounted with fluid ease, landing softly on the packed earth. Up close, he was even taller than she had estimated, and his eyes were a striking hazel that shifted between green and gold depending on how the light hit them. "Name's Colton Anderson. I run a ranch about 5 miles northeast of here, and you are Victoria Emerson." She extended her hand formally, and he took it, his palm calloused and warm. His handshake was firm but gentle. "I am a cartographer. I came from Boston to map this territory." "A cartographer who is lost in the very territory she means to map," Colton said, and despite his obvious amusement, there was no meanness in his tone. "That is unfortunate timing." "The map I purchased was inaccurate," Victoria said defensively. "The landmarks were entirely misleading." Colton glanced at the paper in her hand and let out a low whistle. "Well, there is your first problem. This map is from 1868, and half of these landmarks washed away in a flood 3 years ago. Where were you trying to go?" "I have a room booked at a boarding house in Winnemucca. I left yesterday morning to survey the area, and I thought I had been following a clear path back, but—" She gestured helplessly at the endless expanse of desert surrounding them. "You are about 15 miles south of where you think you are," Colton said, studying the landscape with the confidence of someone who knew every inch of it, "and heading in the opposite direction of town. If you had kept going the way you were headed, you would have ended up in some pretty rough territory by nightfall. Lucky I was out checking fence lines and spotted you." Victoria felt a chill despite the heat. She had heard stories about travelers who wandered into the desert and were never seen again. "I see. Well, I appreciate you stopping. If you could point me in the right direction, I will not take up any more of your time." Colton looked at the position of the sun, then back at her. "Miss Emerson, the right direction is a good 3-hour ride from here, and the sun will be down in 2. You would be riding in the dark through territory you do not know, with a horse that is already tired." He paused, seeming to consider his words carefully. "My ranch is much closer. You could stay the night, head back to town in the morning with proper directions. We have a guest room, and my housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, would be happy for the company. It would be the safer choice." Every rule of propriety Victoria had been raised with screamed that this was inappropriate. She did not know this man, and accepting his hospitality could be seen as scandalous. But propriety seemed less important than survival, and there was something honest in his eyes, a straightforwardness that she instinctively trusted. "That is very kind of you," she said carefully. "But I would not want to impose. No imposition. We do not get many visitors, especially not many who are temporarily disoriented cartographers from Boston." His smile was infectious, and despite herself, Victoria felt her lips twitch upward. "Come on, Miss Emerson. Let me get you somewhere safe before the coyotes start their evening chorus." She nodded, and he helped her mount Daisy before swinging back up onto his own horse with practiced ease. As they began riding northeast, Victoria tried to memorize the landscape, noting the distinctive rock formations and the way the land sloped gradually upward. If she was going to map this territory properly, she needed to start paying better attention. "So what brings a Boston cartographer all the way out to Nevada?" Colton asked as they rode. His horse maintained an easy pace that Daisy could match without strain. "The Geological Survey commissioned a series of updated maps of the Nevada territory," Victoria explained. "I applied for the position, and to everyone's surprise, including my own, they accepted. I have been mapping for 5 years now, primarily in the eastern states, but I wanted to prove I could handle more challenging terrain. And how is that working out for you so far?" The teasing note was back in his voice. "Aside from today's temporary disorientation, quite well actually," she said primly. "I have successfully mapped 12 square miles of territory around Winnemucca with complete accuracy. 12 square miles in 3 days. That is impressive work." 3 weeks, she corrected. "I have been here for 3 weeks. I am very thorough. I can see that." He pointed ahead to where a cluster of buildings was becoming visible in the distance. "That is the Anderson Ranch. My father built it 20 years ago when he first came out here. It is not fancy, but it is solid." As they drew closer, Victoria could see that solid was an understatement. The main house was a sprawling two-story structure built of timber and stone, with a wide porch that wrapped around the front. Several outbuildings dotted the property. A large barn, a bunkhouse, various storage sheds, and a windmill that creaked as it turned in the breeze. Cattle grazed in distant pastures, and the whole operation spoke of prosperity and careful management. A small woman with graying black hair appeared on the porch as they approached, wiping her hands on her apron. Her face lit up when she saw Colton, then registered curiosity when she noticed Victoria. "Mrs. Chen, we have a guest," Colton called out as he dismounted. "This is Miss Victoria Emerson, a cartographer from Boston who got herself temporarily disoriented out past the South Ridge. She will be staying the night." Mrs. Chen hurried down the steps, her face breaking into a warm smile. "Oh, you poor dear, you must be exhausted. Come in, come in. I will get you some water and something to eat." She turned to Colton. "Take care of her horse and do not forget to wash up before supper." "Yes, madam," Colton said with a grin, clearly used to taking orders from her despite being the ranch's owner. He helped Victoria dismount, his hand steady at her waist, and she felt a flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with hunger. Mrs. Chen ushered Victoria into the house, keeping up a steady stream of cheerful conversation about how lonely it was out here and how nice it was to have another woman to talk to. The interior of the house was surprisingly comfortable, with well-made furniture and colorful rugs covering the wooden floors. Family photographs lined the walls, and fresh flowers sat in a vase on the dining table. "The guest room is upstairs, second door on the right," Mrs. Chen said, leading the way. "It has its own wash basin, and I will bring up some hot water so you can freshen up. Supper will be ready in about an hour." The guest room was simple but welcoming, with a large bed covered in a handmade quilt, a dresser with a mirror, and a window that looked out over the ranch. Victoria thanked Mrs. Chen profusely and, once alone, sank onto the bed with a sigh of relief. Her feet ached from standing in her riding boots all day, and her shoulders were sore from tension. She removed her hat and began pulling pins from her hair, letting the auburn waves fall loose around her shoulders. A knock came at the door, and Mrs. Chen entered with a pitcher of hot water and fresh towels. "Here you are, dear. Take your time. Mr. Colton is particular about sitting down to supper at a decent hour, but he will wait." "Mrs. Chen," Victoria said hesitantly, "is it really all right for me to be here? I mean with propriety and all." The older woman laughed. "Oh, do not worry about that. This is the frontier, dear, not some stuffy Boston drawing room. Out here, we help people who need it, and we do not let them die of thirst or exposure just because some rule book says it might look improper. Besides, I am here as chaperone, and Mr. Colton is as honorable as they come. His parents raised him right before they passed." Victoria felt a pang of sympathy. How long ago did they pass? His mother died 6 years ago, his father 3 years after that. Colton was only 22 when he took over the ranch, but he has run it as well as his father ever did. Better even. He has expanded the herd and improved the land. He is a good man, Miss Emerson. You are safe here." After Mrs. Chen left, Victoria washed the dust from her face and hands, braided her hair into a more practical style, and changed into the one spare dress she had packed in her saddlebag. It was a simple green cotton day dress, but it was clean and considerably less dusty than what she had been wearing. When she made her way downstairs, following the scent of cooking food, she found the dining table set for 3. Colton was already seated, his hair damp from washing, wearing a clean shirt. He stood when she entered, his eyes widening slightly as he took in her appearance. "Miss Emerson, you look much refreshed. Please call me Victoria." After you rescued me from becoming a permanent landmark in the desert, I think we can dispense with quite so much formality. Then you should call me Colton." He pulled out a chair for her, and she sat, trying not to think about how this felt oddly domestic, like they were a couple sitting down to supper rather than strangers thrown together by circumstance. "Mrs. Chen brought out plates heaped with roast beef, potatoes, vegetables, and fresh bread that was still warm from the oven. Victoria realized she had not eaten a proper meal since breakfast, and she dug in with perhaps less delicacy than she should have. Both Colton and Mrs. Chen seemed pleased by her appetite rather than offended. "So tell me about cartography," Colton said, cutting into his beef. "What made you want to draw maps for a living?" Victoria swallowed her bite of potato. "My father was a surveyor. He used to take me with him when I was young, and I loved seeing how he could take measurements and observations and turn them into something tangible, something that would help people navigate the world. When he died, I was 16, and I decided I wanted to continue his work. It took years of study and practice, and I had to fight twice as hard as any man to be taken seriously, but eventually I earned my reputation. I imagine it is not easy being a woman in such a profession," Colton said. "It is not," Victoria admitted, "but I am stubborn. And I am good at what I do, usually." She smiled wryly. "Today notwithstanding. Today was just bad luck and a worse map," Colton said. "From what you described, you have done impressive work. 12 square miles mapped accurately in 3 weeks, all on your own. Most surveying teams would take twice that long." "Do you know much about surveying?" Victoria asked, surprised. "Enough. When you run a ranch, you need to know your boundaries, water rights, grazing areas. I have had to do some basic surveying work myself. Nothing as sophisticated as what you do, but I can read a map and use a compass without getting myself temporarily disoriented." His eyes danced with humor. "I am never going to live that down, am I?" "Not for a while," he admitted with a grin. "After supper, Mrs. Chen shooed them both out of the kitchen while she cleaned up, insisting that Victoria was a guest and Colton would just get in the way. They ended up on the front porch, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and pink as it sank toward the horizon. The temperature had dropped to something almost comfortable, and a slight breeze carried the scent of sagebrush and wildflowers. "It is beautiful out here," Victoria said softly, leaning against the porch railing. "Different from Boston, but beautiful in its own way." "I have never been to Boston," Colton said, standing beside her. "Never been much of anywhere, really. I was born in Missouri, but we came out here when I was 7. This is all I know." "Do you ever want to see other places?" He was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes. But this land gets in your blood. The space, the freedom, the way you can see for miles in every direction. I do not know if I could live somewhere crowded and closed in." "Boston is certainly crowded," Victoria said, "and in many ways closed in, though not just physically. There are so many rules about what you can and cannot do, who you can and cannot see, how you must behave. Out here, despite getting lost, I feel like I can breathe." "Is that why you took this job? To escape?" "Partly," she admitted, "though I truly do love the work. But yes, I wanted to see if there was more to life than tea parties and finding a suitable husband." "No suitable husband in Boston?" Colton asked, and she thought she detected a note of genuine curiosity in his voice. "None who could accept that I had ambitions beyond running a household. They wanted a wife who would stay home and host dinner parties, not one who wanted to traipse around the countryside with surveying equipment." She glanced at him. "What about you? No wife to help run this ranch?" "I have been too busy keeping the place running to do much courting," he said. "And the few eligible women around here are either already spoken for or looking for something I cannot give them." "What is that?" a life in town, or at least closer to civilization. Ranching is hard, isolated work. Not many women want to sign up for that. There was no bitterness in his voice, just simple statement of fact. That seems short-sighted of them, Victoria said before she could stop herself. This is a good life you have built here. Anyone could see that. He turned to look at her, his expression unreadable in the fading light. You think so? I do. It is honest work, and you have clearly put your heart into it. That counts for something. They stood in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, scattered across the darkening sky like diamonds on velvet. Victoria found herself reluctant to go inside, to break this moment of peace. Tomorrow she would return to town, and this would become just an interesting story to tell. A strange detour in her mapping project. Finally, as the last light faded completely, Colton said, "We should turn in. I want to get you back to town early tomorrow before the heat becomes unbearable." Victoria nodded, following him back inside. Mrs. Chen had already retired to her quarters, a small cottage behind the main house, leaving them alone in the quiet building. Colton lit a lamp and handed it to Victoria. "Sleep well," he said, "and do not worry about oversleeping. I will wake you when it is time." "Thank you, Colton, for everything. I hate to think what might have happened if you had not found me." "You probably would have figured it out eventually," he said kindly. "You strike me as the resourceful type." In her room, Victoria changed into her nightgown and climbed into the comfortable bed, but sleep was slow to come. Her mind kept returning to the man downstairs, to his easy smile and the way he had rescued her without making her feel foolish or helpless. She had met many men in her travels, but few had treated her with such a natural mixture of respect and good humor. Most either dismissed her entirely or fell over themselves trying to help with tasks she was perfectly capable of managing. Colton had simply treated her like a person, nothing more and nothing less. She finally drifted off to the sound of cattle lowing softly in the distance and the creak of the windmill spinning in the night breeze. Morning came too soon, announced by the rooster's crow and the smell of coffee and frying bacon wafting up from the kitchen. Victoria dressed quickly in her traveling clothes, which Mrs. Chen had kindly cleaned of dust while she slept. When she came downstairs, she found Colton and Mrs. Chen already at the table. "Good morning," Colton said, standing. "I hope you slept well." "Very well, thank you. Better than I have in weeks at the boarding house, actually." Breakfast was hearty and filling, and as they ate, Colton spread a proper map on the table, showing Victoria exactly where they were and how to get back to Winnemucca. "The trick is to use the mountains as your reference points," he explained, pointing to the peaks visible through the window. "Those are the Sonoma Range to the east. As long as you keep them on your right as you head north, you will stay on track. There is a creek about 3 miles out that runs parallel to the road. Follow it, and it will take you right into town." Victoria studied the map carefully, committing it to memory. "May I copy this?" she asked, pulling out her own mapping journal. "For my records, of course." She spent the next 20 minutes sketching a careful duplicate of the local geography, adding notations about landmarks and distances. Colton watched with evident interest, occasionally offering details about features she might find useful. "You have a steady hand," he observed, "and your proportions are exact. Thank you. It comes from years of practice." She finished the last notation and closed her journal. "There. Now I will not get temporarily disoriented again." He laughed, and the sound was warm and genuine. "You are never going to let yourself live that down, are you?" "Never." Too soon, it was time to leave. Colton had Daisy saddled and ready, along with his own horse. "I will ride with you part of the way," he said when Victoria protested that he had already done enough. "Just to make sure you find the creek. After that, it is a straight shot to town. Mrs. Chen hugged Victoria goodbye as if they were old friends rather than recent acquaintances. You come back and visit any time, dear. It has been wonderful having you here. Thank you for your hospitality, Victoria said, meaning it. I hope I will have the chance to return. The ride to the creek took less than an hour, and Victoria found herself wishing it were longer. Colton was easy company, pointing out various features of the landscape and telling stories about the ranch and the territory. He had a gift for storytelling, painting pictures with his words that brought the history of the land to life. When they reached the creek, a clear stream that burbled over smooth stones, Colton reined in his horse. This is it. Follow this north and you will see the town within 2 hours. You cannot miss it. Thank you again, Victoria said, suddenly feeling oddly reluctant to say goodbye. I truly appreciate everything you have done. It was my pleasure, Victoria, truly. He hesitated, then added, if you find yourself out this way again for your mapping work or otherwise, you are always welcome at the ranch. Mrs. Chen meant what she said. I will keep that in mind. She urged Daisy forward, then turned back. Colton, maybe I will see you in town sometime. Winnemucca is not that large a place. His face brightened. I come in every week for supplies, usually on Saturdays, the mercantile by the bank around midday. I will look for you then. She rode away, forcing herself not to look back, though she could feel his eyes on her until she rounded a bend in the creek and he disappeared from view. The ride back to town passed uneventfully, and true to Colton's word, she found Winnemucca exactly where he had promised it would be. The boarding house keeper, Mrs. Sullivan, was relieved to see her. I was getting worried when you did not return last night, she said. This territory can be dangerous for a woman alone. I was fortunate to be helped by a local rancher, Victoria said, not elaborating further. Over the next week, Victoria threw herself into her work with renewed focus. She carefully mapped the territory north of town, then west, using Colton's tips about reading the landscape. Her maps became more detailed, more accurate, and she felt a growing confidence in her ability to navigate this new terrain. But beneath the satisfaction of good work, she found her thoughts returning again and again to the Anderson ranch and its owner. Saturday came, and Victoria found herself dressing with more care than usual, choosing her better day dress and taking extra time with her hair. She told herself it was simply about presenting herself professionally in town, but she knew she was lying. At 11:30, she made her way to the mercantile, her heart beating faster than it should. Colton was there, leaning against the counter talking to the shopkeeper, his arms full of supplies. He looked up as the bell above the door chimed, and his whole face lit up when he saw her. Victoria, he said, straightening. I hoped you might stop by. I was in town anyway, she said, trying to sound casual. I needed some supplies for a longer surveying trip I am planning. Well then, let me help you find what you need. I know this store better than my own barn. They spent the next hour walking through the mercantile together, discussing the relative merits of different types of rope, the best preserved foods for long trips, and whether her canteen was large enough for extended travel in the desert heat. The shopkeeper watched them with barely concealed amusement, clearly recognizing a courtship in progress, even if the participants had not quite admitted it themselves yet. Have you had lunch? Colton asked as they completed their purchases. There is a decent restaurant 2 doors down. Nothing fancy, but the food is good. I would like that, Victoria said. The restaurant was small and simple, with checkered tablecloths and mismatched chairs, but the stew was hearty and the bread was fresh. They talked for 2 hours, conversation flowing easily from topic to topic. Colton told her about the challenges of ranching, about the time a flash flood nearly wiped out his herd, about the satisfaction of seeing calves born healthy in spring. Victoria described her travels, the places she had mapped, the absurdities of trying to work in a profession dominated by men who often treated her like a novelty rather than a colleague. "How long will you stay in Winnemucca?" Colton asked, and there was something careful in his voice, as if the answer mattered more than casual curiosity would warrant. "I am contracted for 6 months of mapping work in this region," Victoria said. "I have been here 4 weeks, so I have 5 more months, give or take. After that, I am supposed to return to Boston to compile my findings. Supposed to. Well, my contract requires it, but after that, I am free to take other jobs wherever they might be." She met his eyes. "I find I am enjoying Nevada more than I expected to." His smile was slow and warm. "I am glad to hear that." They began meeting regularly after that. Every Saturday, Colton came to town and they would have lunch together, sometimes dinner if he could stay late enough. He showed her shortcuts through the territory, helped her identify landmarks that would be useful for her maps, and shared his deep knowledge of the land. In return, she told him about the wider world, about innovations happening in the East, about the books she had read and the places she hoped to visit someday. One Saturday in August, 6 weeks after they first met, Colton invited her back to the ranch for Sunday supper. "Mrs. Chen has been asking about you," he said. "She wants to hear about your mapping adventures, and I thought, if you were willing, I could show you the northern section of my property. There is a canyon up there with rock formations that might be worth including in your survey." Victoria agreed immediately, perhaps more eagerly than was strictly proper. That Sunday, she rode out to the ranch in the early afternoon, following the route she now knew by heart. Colton was waiting for her on the porch, and they set out on horseback toward the northern reaches of his property. The canyon was breathtaking, with striated red and orange walls that glowed in the sunlight, and a small waterfall that created a pool of clear, cool water at the base. Victoria immediately began sketching, noting elevations and key features, while Colton watched with evident pleasure. "I used to come here as a boy," he said, sitting on a flat rock while she worked. "It was my secret place. I never showed anyone except my parents." Victoria looked up from her journal. "Then why show me?" "Because I wanted you to see it." His hazel eyes were serious now, the perpetual amusement dimmed. "Victoria, these past weeks, getting to know you, have been some of the best I can remember. You are brilliant and funny and brave, and I find myself thinking about you constantly when we are apart." Her pencil stilled. "I think about you too," she admitted quietly. "More than I should, probably." He stood and crossed to where she sat, extending his hand. She took it and let him help her to her feet. They stood close, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his eyes, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from him. "I know this is complicated," Colton said. "You have your work, your life in Boston, your career. I am not going to pretend I can offer you the sophistication of the city, or that ranching is easy or glamorous. But I need you to know that my feelings for you are real." "My feelings for you are real too," Victoria said, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "I have never met anyone like you, Colton. You treat me as an equal, you respect my work, but more than that, you see me, not just the cartographer or the woman trying to prove herself, but me." "So what do we do about it?" he asked. "I do not know," she said honestly. "My contract runs through January. After that, I need to deliver my maps to the survey office in Washington, but after that—" She paused, considering. "After that, I could choose where I wanted to be. And where would you want to be?" His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "I think I would want to be here," she said. "If that was an option." "It is definitely an option." He smiled, and the joy in his expression made her breath catch. More than an option, it is what I have been hoping for since about the second Saturday we met. Only the second Saturday. She teased. Well, the first Saturday I was still trying to convince myself I was not falling for a temporarily disoriented cartographer from Boston. By the second Saturday, I had given up pretending. She laughed, and then he was kissing her, gentle and tentative at first, then deeper as she responded, her arms coming up to wrap around his neck. The kiss tasted of promise and possibility, of a future she had not dared to imagine until now. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Victoria rested her forehead against his. "We still have to be practical about this," she said. "I have 5 months of work left and I need to complete it properly." "Of course. I would never ask you to compromise your work," Colton said. "We have time. We can figure this out together." They returned to the ranch for supper, and if Mrs. Chen noticed the way they could barely stop looking at each other, the way their hands occasionally brushed during the meal, she said nothing. But her knowing smile suggested she approved. Over the following months, as summer faded into autumn and then toward winter, Victoria and Colton's relationship deepened. She continued her mapping work with diligent precision, covering square mile after square mile of Nevada territory. Colton often rode out with her when he could spare the time, serving as both companion and assistant. He had a natural eye for the landscape that complemented her technical skills, and they made an excellent team. In September, they went to a barn dance in a town 15 miles from Winnemucca, and Colton held her close as they swayed to the fiddle music, not caring who saw or what assumptions people might make. Victoria found she did not care either. The strict social rules of Boston seemed increasingly distant and irrelevant. In October, the first real cold snap hit, bringing frost in the mornings and the threat of early snow. Victoria worried about completing her survey before winter made travel too difficult. Colton helped her plan her routes more efficiently, and she managed to finish 3 critical sections she had been concerned about. In November, over Sunday supper at the ranch, Mrs. Chen announced she would be spending the winter with her daughter in San Francisco. "She is expecting her first baby in January," she explained, "and she wants me there. I will return in spring, of course, assuming that is acceptable, Mr. Colton." "Of course it is," Colton said. "Family comes first, but I will miss your cooking something terrible." "You will manage, Mrs. Chen said with a knowing look at Victoria. "I am sure you will find ways to survive." After she left the room, Colton turned to Victoria. "I will be at the ranch alone most of the winter once Mrs. Chen leaves. The hands stay in the bunkhouse, but the main house will just be me." "Will you be lonely?" Victoria asked. "Probably," he admitted. "Unless you were willing to visit more often. For mapping purposes, of course." "Of course," she echoed with a smile. "The Northern Territories still need significant surveying." In December, as Victoria prepared for her final month of intensive mapping work, a letter arrived from the Geological Survey. She opened it with trembling hands, Colton standing beside her in the Winnemucca post office. "They want me to extend my contract another 6 months," she said, scanning the letter. "They are so pleased with the quality of my work that they want me to expand the survey to include more of northern Nevada. They are offering a significant increase in pay." "That is wonderful," Colton said, though his voice was carefully neutral. "What will you tell them?" Victoria looked at him, at this man who had become the center of her world and made her decision. "I am going to tell them I will take the extension, but only if I can base myself permanently out of Winnemucca rather than returning to Washington to compile the data. I can do the compilation work anywhere, and I can mail the completed maps when they are ready." His face broke into a wide grin. "You are sure?" "I am sure." My life is here now. My work is here and you are here, and that is all I need." He picked her up and spun her around right there in the post office, not caring that the postal clerk was watching with undisguised interest. When he set her down, he cupped her face in his hands. "Marry me," he said. "I know it is fast, I know there are practical considerations, but marry me, Victoria. Be my wife, my partner. Help me run the ranch and continue your mapping work. We can build a life together." "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, absolutely yes." They were married in January of 1875 in a simple ceremony at the small church in Winnemucca. Mrs. Chen returned from San Francisco just in time to attend, crying happy tears throughout the service. The ranch hands served as witnesses, along with Mrs. Sullivan from the boarding house and the mercantile owner who had watched their courtship develop. Victoria wore a dress of deep blue silk she had purchased from a dressmaker in town, and Colton wore a new suit that made him look almost uncomfortable until she whispered that he was the handsomest man she had ever seen, and then his smile returned. The winter that followed was the happiest time of Victoria's life. She moved into the ranch house, turning one of the spare rooms into an office where she could work on compiling her maps. Colton proved to be an excellent husband, supportive of her work, but also ensuring she remembered to eat and sleep and take breaks. They fell into an easy partnership, working together on the ranch during the day and sitting by the fire at night, talking about everything and nothing. In February, during a particularly harsh snowstorm that kept them housebound for 3 days, Victoria discovered she was pregnant. She told Colton while they were snowed in, the fire crackling in the hearth, and he held her close, his joy almost palpable. "A baby," he whispered. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" she asked, though his expression made the answer obvious. "Happier than I knew it was possible to be," he said. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Victoria continued her mapping work until she became too uncomfortable to ride long distances. By then, she had completed nearly all the surveying work required for her extended contract and spent her days at the ranch office, carefully drafting the final maps that would be sent to Washington. In late September, with Mrs. Chen in attendance and a doctor summoned from Winnemucca, Victoria gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Samuel, after Colton's father, and he had his father's hazel eyes and his mother's auburn hair. Colton was a devoted father, spending every spare moment with his son, teaching him about the ranch even though Samuel was far too young to understand. Victoria would often find them on the porch, Colton holding the baby and pointing out features of the landscape, explaining the geography as if Samuel could comprehend the details. "You do realize he cannot understand you yet," Victoria said with amusement one afternoon. "He will eventually," Colton replied, completely serious. "And when he does, he will already know this land like the back of his hand, just like his mother knows it." When Samuel was 6 months old, Victoria completed the last of her contracted maps and sent them to Washington. The reply came a month later, full of praise for her work and an offer for additional contracts throughout the West. She accepted a smaller project that would allow her to work primarily from the ranch, venturing out only occasionally for specific surveys. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The ranch prospered under Colton's management, the herd growing year by year. Victoria's reputation as a cartographer continued to grow, and she received regular commissions from various government agencies and private companies. She became known for her meticulous accuracy and her willingness to survey difficult terrain that other mapmakers avoided. When Samuel was 2, Victoria became pregnant again, and in 1878 she gave birth to a daughter they named Eleanor. She had her mother's determination and her father's easy smile, and from the moment she could walk, she followed Colton around the ranch like a tiny shadow. Mrs. Chen remained with them through it all, helping care for the children and running the household. She became like a grandmother to Samuel and Alina, teaching them songs from her childhood and telling them stories about the old days when the territory was even wilder than it was now. In 1881, Victoria published a comprehensive atlas of northern Nevada, the culmination of 7 years of surveying work. It was widely acclaimed for its accuracy and detail, and she received recognition from the National Geographic Society and other prestigious organizations. But the achievement she was most proud of was not the accolades or the professional recognition. It was the knowledge that she had helped make this territory safer and more accessible for the people who lived here and those who would come after. On their 6th wedding anniversary, Colton gave her a gift, a beautiful brass compass engraved with the words "For my favorite cartographer, who will never be lost as long as you have me. Love, C." "I was lost before I met you," Victoria said, turning the compass over in her hands. "Temporarily disoriented in more ways than one, but you guided me home." "You were never lost," Colton said, pulling her close. "You just had not found where you belonged yet." "And where do I belong?" she asked, though she knew the answer. "Here with me, on this ranch in this territory, raising our children and mapping the world. Exactly where you have always been meant to be." She kissed him, tasting the truth of his words, feeling the solid reality of the life they had built together. The compass was warm in her hand, a tangible reminder that she had found her true north. And it had nothing to do with geography and everything to do with the man who had rescued her from the desert and brought her into his life. The years continued to pass, each one adding more texture and depth to their story. Samuel grew into a thoughtful, intelligent boy who loved the ranch, but also inherited his mother's curiosity about the world. At 8 years old, he would often accompany Victoria on shorter surveying trips, learning to use the instruments and understanding the mathematics behind mapping. Alina proved to have her father's natural connection to the land and animals, able to gentle the most skittish horse, and always knowing when a storm was coming by the way the cattle behaved. In 1883, Victoria received a prestigious commission to create a comprehensive water resource map of Nevada, documenting every spring, creek, and river in the territory. It was a massive undertaking that would take years to complete, but she accepted it eagerly. Water rights were becoming increasingly important as more settlers moved west, and accurate mapping could prevent conflicts and ensure fair distribution. Colton supported the project wholeheartedly, often joking that he had married a woman who knew more about Nevada's water sources than any man alive. He was right, and her expertise became sought after by ranchers, farmers, and town planners throughout the region. That same year, they added a 3rd child to their family, another boy they named Matthew. He arrived during a rare summer rainstorm, and Mrs. Chen declared it was a lucky omen for a child to be born during rain in such a dry land. The ranch continued to expand and prosper. Colton implemented new breeding techniques he had read about in agricultural journals, improving the quality of his herd. He built a new barn, expanded the grazing lands, and drilled 2 additional wells to ensure water security during dry years. Victoria's income from her mapping work, which had grown substantial, allowed them to invest in improvements they might not otherwise have been able to afford. Their home became a gathering place for neighbors and travelers. Victoria's reputation meant that surveyors, geologists, and scientists often stopped at the Anderson Ranch when working in the region. Colton enjoyed meeting new people and hearing about developments in the wider world, and their children benefited from exposure to diverse perspectives and ideas. In 1885, tragedy struck when a severe winter storm killed nearly a quarter of their cattle. It was a devastating financial blow, and for a few dark weeks, Victoria and Colton worried they might lose the ranch. But they worked together, using Victoria's savings from her mapping contracts to cover immediate expenses while Colton negotiated with buyers and creditors. By spring, they had stabilized, though it took 2 full years to rebuild the herd to its previous size. The experience brought them even closer, proving that their partnership could weather hardship as well as prosperity. "We are a good team," Colton said one night as they went over the ranch accounts together. "Always have been, from the very beginning." "From the moment you found a temporarily disoriented cartographer in the desert," Victoria agreed with a smile. In 1887, Victoria completed her comprehensive water resource map of Nevada. The final document was a masterpiece, praised by hydrologists and government officials alike. Several copies were purchased by the state government, and the original was archived in the National Survey Office. A profile of Victoria appeared in a major Eastern newspaper, celebrating her as one of the leading cartographers in America, and noting the unusual path that had led a Boston woman to become an expert on the Nevada territory. The article brought her additional fame and several lucrative commissions from companies interested in mining and rail development. She accepted only those projects that aligned with her principles, refusing work from companies she suspected would exploit the land or its people without regard for sustainability. Samuel, now 13, announced his intention to attend college back east to study engineering. Victoria and Colton were proud but also apprehensive about their eldest child venturing so far from home. They supported his ambition, knowing that education would open doors for him that had not existed for their generation. Eleanor, at 9, declared she would run the ranch someday, and no one doubted her. She had an uncanny ability to manage the cattle and had already started learning the business side of ranching from her father. Matthew, at 4, was still young but showed signs of inheriting his mother's analytical mind, constantly asking questions about how things worked and why. Mrs. Chen, now in her 60s, finally decided to retire fully and move to San Francisco to live with her daughter permanently. Her departure was bittersweet, and both Victoria and Colton cried at the farewell party they threw for her. She had been part of their family from the beginning, and the house felt emptier without her cheerful presence. They hired a younger housekeeper, a widow named Mrs. Patterson, who proved capable and kind, though no one could truly replace Mrs. Chen. Still, life adapted as it always did. In 1890, Victoria accepted what would be her final major surveying contract. She was 41 years old and had been mapping for 25 years. The project was to create a comprehensive atlas of the entire Nevada territory, incorporating all the work she had done over the past decades, plus new surveys to fill in any gaps. It would be her magnum opus, the definitive geographic record of the state. She spent the next 3 years on the project, working with a small team of assistant surveyors she trained herself. Colton, whose own children were increasingly capable of managing ranch operations, often accompanied her on expeditions, serving as guide, assistant, and companion. They revisited the southern ridge where they had first met, and Colton joked that he should put up a marker. "Here Victoria Emerson got temporarily disoriented and changed my life forever." The atlas was published in 1893 to immediate acclaim. It was printed on high-quality paper with detailed hand-colored maps, showing not just geographical features but also information about climate, vegetation, water resources, and mineral deposits. The first edition sold out within months, and it remained the standard reference for Nevada geography for the next 30 years. Victoria was invited to speak at universities and geographical societies, though she accepted only a few invitations, preferring to stay close to home. When she did speak, she always credited her husband and children for their support and talked about the importance of allowing women into fields traditionally dominated by men. Samuel graduated from college with honors and accepted a position with a civil engineering firm in Denver. He visited the ranch regularly and wrote letters full of details about his work designing bridges and water systems. Eleanor, at 15, was indeed proving herself capable of running the ranch, and Colton began teaching her everything he knew about herd management, land stewardship, and business operations. Matthew, at 10, had become fascinated with astronomy and often stayed up late with a telescope Victoria had purchased for him, mapping the stars as his mother mapped the Earth. In 1895, on a warm spring day that reminded Victoria of the day she had gotten lost 2 decades earlier, she and Colton rode out to the canyon, where he had first told her he loved her. They were both in their mid-40s now, their faces showing the lines of years lived fully, their bodies bearing the marks of hard work and good times. "You ever regret it?" Colton asked as they sat by the waterfall. "Staying here instead of returning east? You could have had an easier life, more recognition, more opportunity." Victoria looked at him incredulously. "Regret it? Colton, you gave me everything I ever wanted. A partnership of equals, children I adore, work that challenges and fulfills me, and a love deeper than I ever thought possible. What could I possibly regret? You could have been famous in Boston society. I am famous where it matters, in my field and in this territory, and more importantly, I am happy. Are you happy? Happier than I ever dreamed," he said, taking her hand. "That day I found you wandering in circles with your map upside down was the luckiest day of my life." "I was not wandering in circles," she protested, laughing. "You absolutely were, but I am eternally grateful you were." They sat together as the sun moved across the sky, talking about their children, about the ranch, about the changes they had seen in Nevada over the years. More settlers had arrived, towns had grown, and the territory was slowly becoming more civilized, though it retained much of its wild character. "I worry sometimes about Eleanor," Victoria admitted. "About whether she will be able to run the ranch as a woman. People still do not take women seriously in business." "If anyone can handle it, she can," Colton said confidently. "She has your stubbornness and your intelligence, plus she has actually grown up here. She knows this land better than most men twice her age. People will respect her, or they will learn to." In 1897, Victoria officially retired from active surveying work, though she continued to consult on projects and update her maps as needed. At 48, she felt ready to focus more attention on her family and the ranch. She began writing a book about her experiences as a female cartographer in the West, hoping to inspire other women to pursue unconventional careers. Samuel, now 22, became engaged to a schoolteacher from Denver, a smart, kind young woman named Catherine. Victoria and Colton traveled to Denver for the wedding, their first major trip away from the ranch in years. The ceremony was lovely, and watching her eldest son marry reminded Victoria of her own wedding over 2 decades earlier. Eleanor, at 17, showed no interest in marriage, completely focused on learning everything about ranching. She had plans to expand their operation, to implement new techniques she had read about, and to make the Anderson Ranch the most successful in northern Nevada. Colton beamed with pride every time she discussed her ideas. Matthew, at 14, won a prize for his astronomical observations, and received a scholarship offer from a university in California. He was torn between accepting it and staying to help with the ranch, but both Victoria and Colton insisted he pursue his education. "We did not raise you to limit your dreams," Victoria told him. "Go learn everything you can, and then decide where you want to be." In 1900, as a new century dawned, Victoria and Colton celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary. The ranch threw a huge party, with neighbors coming from miles around. Samuel and Catherine traveled from Denver with their infant daughter, making Victoria and Colton grandparents for the first time. Eleanor organized the entire event with military precision. Matthew came home from university, full of stories about his studies. As Victoria looked around at the gathered friends and family, at the ranch that had become her home, at the man who had rescued her from more than just physical displacement, she felt overwhelming gratitude. She had left Boston seeking adventure and independence, had gotten lost in more ways than one, and had found something far more valuable than she had ever sought: a true home, a true partnership, and a true love. That evening, after the guests had departed and the children had gone to bed, Victoria and Colton stood on the porch watching the stars emerge in the vast Nevada sky. The night was clear and cool, and the familiar sounds of the ranch surrounded them: cattle lowing, horses moving in their stalls, the windmill creaking as it turned. 25 years, Colton said, his arm around her waist. "Longer than I even dared hope for when I found you that day." "I was not expecting to find anything out here except good mapping opportunities," Victoria said. "Instead, I found everything." "We have been lucky," Colton agreed. "Lucky in our children, in our work, in each other. Not many people get to build the life they truly want." "We did not just get lucky," Victoria said. "We worked for it. We chose each other every day through the hard times and the good times. That was not luck, that was commitment." He turned to face her, his hazel eyes, now framed by lines of age, still dancing with that familiar amusement she had fallen in love with decades earlier. "Well, I am committed to continuing to choose you every day for as long as I have." "That is good," she said, standing on her toes to kiss him. "Because I plan on being here to be chosen." In 1902, Eleanor took over daily management of the ranch, with Colton serving as advisor and mentor. She proved every bit as capable as predicted, negotiating favorable contracts and implementing improvements that increased profitability. She also fell in love, much to her own surprise, with a neighboring rancher named Thomas Crawford, whose land adjoined the Anderson property to the north. They married in a simple ceremony, and Thomas moved to the Anderson ranch, content to work alongside his formidable wife. Samuel and Catherine had 2 more children, and Matthew completed his university degree and accepted a position at an observatory in Arizona. All 3 of Victoria and Colton's children were settled and successful, pursuing their own dreams while staying connected to their family and their Nevada roots. Victoria published her memoir in 1903, titled Mapping the West: A Cartographer's Journey. It became a surprise bestseller, particularly popular among young women seeking inspiration for unconventional careers. She received hundreds of letters from readers, many telling her that her story had given them courage to pursue their own ambitions despite societal pressures. In 1905, on a summer day very like the one when Colton had first found her lost in the desert, 31 years earlier, Victoria and Colton rode out together one more time to survey their land. They were both in their mid-50s, still healthy and active, though they moved a bit more slowly than they once had. "You remember exactly where you found me?" Victoria asked as they rode. "Right over there by those rocks," Colton said, pointing. You were turning in circles, squinting at that terrible map, talking to your horse. I was not turning in circles, Victoria protested, as she always did. You absolutely were. It was adorable. They dismounted near the spot, and Victoria pulled out her current map, one of her own making, detailed and accurate. Well, I definitely know where I am now. You have always known where you were, Colton said, coming to stand beside her. Right from the start. You were exactly where you were supposed to be, meeting exactly who you were supposed to meet. You were never really lost, Victoria. You were just finding your way home. She looked at him, this man who had rescued her and loved her and built a life with her, and felt the truth of his words. You are right, she said. I was never lost at all. I was just arriving. The years continued, each one adding depth to their story. They became grandparents several times over, with Samuel and Catherine eventually having 4 children, and Alina and Thomas adding 3 more to the family. Matthew married a fellow astronomer, and they had twin daughters who showed every sign of inheriting their parents' scientific minds. The ranch prospered under Alina's management, growing and adapting to the changing times. The territory became a state. Automobiles began appearing on the roads, and the world transformed around them. But the fundamental truths remained. Hard work, good land, and strong family were still the foundations of a good life. Victoria continued to update her maps and consult on surveying projects into her 60s, though she spent most of her time writing and mentoring young female cartographers who sought her advice. She became a respected elder stateswoman in her field, her opinions sought on major mapping projects throughout the West. In 1915, Victoria and Colton celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary surrounded by children, grandchildren, friends, and neighbors. The celebration was held at the ranch, and people traveled from across the state to honor the couple who had become local legends. The lost cartographer and the rancher who found her, whose love story had become part of Nevada folklore. During the party, Samuel stood to make a toast. To my parents, he said, raising his glass, who taught us that love is not about finding the perfect person, but about building a perfect life together with whoever has the courage to choose you and the commitment to keep choosing you, day after day, year after year. May we all be as lucky as they have been, and may we all work as hard as they have to deserve that luck. Everyone drank to that, and Victoria felt tears prick her eyes. She leaned against Colton, and he wrapped his arm around her, solid and steady as he had always been. As the party wound down and the stars emerged in the vast Nevada sky, Victoria and Colton found themselves alone on the porch once more, in what had become their favorite spot over 4 decades of marriage. 40 years, Victoria mused. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime, and sometimes it feels like we just met yesterday. Both can be true, Colton said. We have lived a whole life together, but I still feel that same excitement when I see you that I felt the first time you walked into my dining room, dusty and temporarily disoriented, but trying so hard to maintain your dignity. I was very dignified, Victoria said primly. You were adorable, he corrected, and brilliant and beautiful and everything I did not know I was looking for until I found you. She turned in his arms, looking up at his face, weathered by years of sun and wind but still handsome, still familiar, still home. I love you, Colton Anderson. I have loved you since that second Saturday, when I stopped pretending I was not falling for an amused rancher who rescued me from my own stubbornness. And I love you, Victoria Anderson, cartographer extraordinaire, mother of my children, partner in all things. You made my life infinitely richer than I ever imagined it could be. They stood together under the stars, in the place where they had built their life, surrounded by the evidence of their decades together. The expanded ranch buildings, the land they had stewarded, the family they had raised, the love they had nurtured through challenges and triumphs alike. Victoria thought about the young woman she had been, setting out from Boston full of ambition and determination, seeking to prove herself in a man's world. She had done that, had succeeded beyond her wildest dreams, had made contributions to her field that would outlast her lifetime. But the greatest achievement, the one that filled her heart most completely, was standing beside her with his arm around her waist, breathing in rhythm with her under the Nevada stars. She had set out to map a territory and ended up mapping the contours of a life well lived, the geography of the heart, the terrain of true partnership. She had been lost once, temporarily disoriented in more ways than she had realized at the time. But Colton had guided her home, not just to his ranch but to herself, to the life she was meant to live, to the love that would define her existence. In the end, Victoria thought, the most important map she had ever created was not of water sources or mountain ranges or geological features. It was the map of the life she and Colton had drawn together, line by line, choice by choice, year by year. A map that showed the path from lost to found, from solitary to partnered, from existing to truly living. And unlike the maps she had drawn of Nevada, this map had no borders, no final boundaries. It would continue to expand as long as they both drew breath, as long as their children and grandchildren carried forward the legacy of love and commitment they had created. As the night deepened and the temperature dropped, they finally went inside, walking hand in hand through the house that had become home, passing photographs that chronicled their decades together, evidence of a life richly lived and deeply loved. In their bedroom, as they prepared for sleep, Colton said, "You know, I still think about that day I found you. I had just been checking fence lines, doing ordinary work, not expecting anything unusual. And there you were, the answer to questions I had not even known to ask." "I think about it too," Victoria said, braiding her hair for the night. "I was so frustrated with myself for getting lost, so worried about what it meant for my professional reputation. I never imagined that being lost was the best thing that could have happened to me." "Maybe you were not lost," Colton said thoughtfully. "Maybe you were exactly where you needed to be, right when you needed to be there. Maybe the universe has a sense of direction even when we do not." "That is a romantic thought," Victoria said, climbing into bed beside him. "I am a romantic man married to a practical woman. It is a good balance." She laughed, settling into his arms, her head on his chest where she could hear the steady beat of his heart. "We are a good balance in every way." "Yes," he agreed softly. "Yes, we are." In 1920, Victoria and Colton both retired fully, turning over complete control of the ranch to Alina and Thomas. They remained in the main house, now serving as elder advisors and devoted grandparents, but the daily operations were no longer their responsibility. It was strange at first, having so much free time, but they quickly adapted, finding new rhythms and routines. They traveled a bit, visiting Samuel in Denver and Matthew in Arizona, taking a trip to San Francisco to see the ocean, and even, finally, visiting Boston so Victoria could show Colton where she had grown up. He was fascinated by the crowded city streets and the historic buildings, but after 2 weeks, he was ready to return to the wide open spaces of Nevada. "I see why you left," he said on the train ride home. "It is impressive, but it is not alive the way our land is alive." "Exactly," Victoria said, pleased that he understood. "I needed space to become myself, and I found it in Nevada. I found it with you." They spent their later years in comfortable companionship, reading together, playing with grandchildren, maintaining a large garden that Victoria had started years earlier. They went on short rides around the ranch when weather permitted, pointing out landmarks and remembering stories associated with different locations. "That is where Samuel broke his arm falling out of a tree," Colton would say, pointing. "That is where we found Alina trying to rope cattle when she was 6 years old," Victoria would add. "That is where you and I had our first kiss," Colton said one day, gesturing toward the canyon that remained one of their special places. "Best kiss of my life," Victoria said. "Only the best." He teased. "Not the best by far, not the most earth-shattering, life-changing kiss in the history of Nevada." "Well, the subsequent kisses have been pretty good too," she admitted with a smile. "You have had a lot of practice." In 1925, they celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary, a milestone that seemed almost miraculous. Not everyone lived long enough to mark half a century of marriage, and they did not take the achievement for granted. The family threw another party, even larger than the one 10 years earlier, with grandchildren now old enough to participate in the planning and execution. A photographer came from Winnemucca to document the occasion, and there is a photograph from that day that became treasured by the family. Victoria and Colton standing on the porch of the ranch house, his arm around her shoulders, her hand on his chest, both of them smiling at each other rather than at the camera. The love in their expressions is palpable, unmistakable, a testament to 50 years of choosing each other. In 1928, Colton's health began to decline. At 79, he had lived a long, full life, but his body was finally slowing down. He developed a persistent cough that would not resolve, and despite medical attention, it was clear his time was growing short. Victoria, 79 herself, refused to leave his side. She set up a chair beside his bed and spent her days there, reading to him, talking about their life together, holding his hand. The children and grandchildren visited regularly, saying their goodbyes, sharing memories, telling him how much he meant to them. On a clear autumn evening, with the sun setting over the land he had loved and stewarded for so many decades, Colton took his final breaths. Victoria held his hand, tears streaming down her face, whispering words of love and gratitude. "Thank you," she said through her tears. "Thank you for finding me, for loving me, for building this life with me. You were the best part of everything." He squeezed her hand weakly, managed a small smile, and then he was gone. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people, testament to the impact Colton had made on his community over nearly 8 decades of life. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch with a simple headstone that read, "Colton Anderson, 1849–1928. Beloved husband, father, grandfather." He knew his home and loved his land. Victoria grieved deeply, feeling the loss like a physical wound. After 53 years together, from that day in the desert to this final parting, Colton had been her constant companion, her partner, her love. The house felt empty without him. The world felt diminished. But she was not alone. Her children rallied around her, making sure she ate and slept and did not withdraw too far into her grief. Her grandchildren visited constantly, filling the house with noise and life and reminders that the legacy she and Colton had created together continued. Alina sat with her one evening a few weeks after the funeral and said gently, "Tell me about the day you met Dad. The real story, not the version you tell at parties." Victoria took a breath and began the tale again, starting with her frustration at being lost, her embarrassment at being found, her immediate connection with the man who had rescued her. As she talked, she realized she was smiling through her tears. "He made me laugh right from the start," she said. "And he never stopped making me laugh all our years together. Even when things were hard, even when we struggled, he could always find something to smile about. "That is a good way to live," Elinor said softly. "It is the best way to live," Victoria agreed. "Your father taught me that, among many other things." Victoria lived another 7 years after Colton's death. Years she filled with writing more extensively, with loving her ever-growing family, with quiet reflection on the extraordinary life she had been blessed to live. She updated her memoir to include the later years of her life and her thoughts on love, loss, and legacy. In 1935, at the age of 86, Victoria's own health began to fail. She faced the decline with the same practical determination she had brought to everything in her life, getting her affairs in order, making sure her maps and papers were properly archived, and spending time with each of her children and grandchildren to share final words and memories. On a warm spring day in May, very like the day she had first arrived in Nevada 61 years earlier, Victoria passed away peacefully in her sleep. She was laid to rest beside Colton on the hill overlooking the ranch, her headstone reading, "Victoria Emerson Anderson, 1849–1935. Cartographer, wife, mother, grandmother, she found her way home. At the funeral, Samuel stood to deliver the eulogy. He spoke of his mother's brilliance, her determination, her pioneering spirit, but mostly he spoke of her love. "My mother and father showed us what it means to truly build a life with someone," he said. "They were not perfect people, and their marriage was not perfect, but they were perfectly committed to each other, to their family, to the land they stewarded together. They created something that will last far beyond their lifetimes, not just in the maps she drew or the ranch they built, but in the example they set and the love they shared. That is their real legacy." The Anderson Ranch continued under Elinor's management, and later under her children's management, remaining in the family for generations. Victoria's maps remained the standard for Nevada geography well into the 20th century, and her memoir inspired countless women to pursue careers in science and exploration. But perhaps the most important legacy was simpler and more profound. The story of two people who found each other against all odds, who chose to build a life together despite obstacles and challenges, and who proved that love, sustained by commitment and nurtured by respect and friendship, could create something beautiful and lasting. The story of the cartographer who got lost and the rancher who found her became part of local folklore, told and retold through the generations. Children growing up in northern Nevada learned about Victoria and Colton, about how being lost sometimes means being found, about how the best maps are the ones we draw together with the people we love. And on the hill overlooking the Anderson Ranch, two headstones stand side by side, marking the resting place of two people who lived fully, loved deeply, and left the world richer for their presence in it. When the light hits right, when the wind blows from the right direction, you can almost hear their voices on the breeze, still talking, still laughing, still together after all these years. The end.